Hey everybody, I'm Jody Vance. Welcome to a very special pre-election, super inside, pull back the curtain, UnSpun podcast. Say hello everyone to the lady at the ledge, should I say. Sajan is with us of CTV, the Legislative Bureau Chief for CTV Vancouver. Welcome. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with a little bit about you. You're always bringing the politics to the people, but we don't know as much about you perhaps. So I'd like to let everybody in on sort of what I got to see before I hit record on the podcast this week. You have a puppy that is so cute.
She is adorable. In fact, we go out for walks. Like maybe in the past, some people might have glanced at me before, but now I can tell you absolutely nobody even knows that I'm there. They think it's just like this adorable puppy attached to a leash because I get no attention. She loves people. She really is just like the light of my life right now. And I'm so happy she's in my house.
Puppy therapy, it goes a long way. You know, you're preaching to the choir on the dog love, but I thought very funny because you've got puppy appointments coming up, and then there's this, election.
Yeah, just a couple of things to get through before I get to my puppy appointment, which is like the most important thing in my life right now. It's hard, it's so weird to think that after all this time, we're just a couple of days away from the weirdest election night that we're probably ever going to see. So it'll be fun.
How's that been for you? Take us on a bit of a journey, because honestly, Bhinder, you and I can probably commiserate a little bit about the fact that there was a time in the before times when, controversy between the Speaker of the House and the clerk and the Sergeant at Arms was a huge story. Wood chippers were a big deal. It's changed so much.
Oh, I remember earlier this year. I mean, it's so hard to think about how many things have happened this year, but like the Wet'suwet'en protest, I'm thinking this was going to be the story of the year. We were going to report on it nearly every single day. And then just like how the world has changed since then. And now, not only are we reporting on something different, we're doing it from home in ways that we've never done it before. Like the first couple of weeks, maybe months of, the lockdown and the pandemic, I think I wasn't even looking in the right spot when I was doing these Skype hits from home. And so the learning curve is huge. You're dealing with something brand new. You're trying to serve the public, and it's just also dealing with a pandemic for yourself. It's just insane times.
So before we get to the politics of an election and a campaign and election and going to the polls in a pandemic, we hear your name being called in the briefings with Dr. Henry. What has that been like for you? What is it like to dial in and stand by? Give us a peek behind that process.
When we're at the legislature, we're constantly asking questions, and it seemed like for the longest time, nobody really cared like what we asked. Nobody knew who asked what. All that mattered were the answers and the stories that came out. And now we're under this huge microscope, I feel like, from the daily briefings with Dr. Bonnie Henry when they were happening back at that time, to think of what a huge audience it was. How many people just wanted any type of information, and trying to do that. And I just realized I was looking at the wrong spot anyway. And just, and how that changed what we did in terms of other people are now like, oh, I just heard your question. I just heard the Premier say this to you, which we didn't get before. It's kind of weird. It doesn't really change what we do, but this pandemic, I think, has really, really brought home that what we do is try to ask questions that everyone wants to know. So when we were talking about some of the restrictions being lifted, and I asked the Premier, so what does this mean? Can I hug my mom this Mother's Day? Some people were like, you're better than asking that question. But other people were like, this is exactly what I want to know. So
I wanted that question. I was like, go girl, I want to know. And it's important to have that connection with people who are asking the questions, like the hate mail that comes in. I get it. you probably get it. Dr. Henry is very open about talking about the death threats and having private security. I mean, clearly you can't please everyone all the time when you're not in a scenario such as this unprecedented moment. But what is it like reaction-wise from people in your inbox?
Yeah, I mean, I find that I have so many supportive friends and family that I always remember that they're the people who know who I am best, so their opinion matters the most. So, I mean, sometimes it's hard because my mom will say, you looked really tired on TV, or you need to wear better clothes. And so, I still pay attention to that. But really, after you do it for so long, really, I just think about the people who know me best. They know me, they know what I'm all about, and that's what I'm going to pay attention to.
I like that, the thick skin piece, because it's like reading the press reaction to a performance, whether you're moderating something or you're fronting a story and somebody has an opinion on it. You can't take the good unless you can also take the bad. So it's sometimes better to just leave it there and then look to the people you trust the most to sort of give you that feedback. And nobody can really knock you off kilter if you just know you're doing, like you said, asking the question that you in your heart want the answer to, and thinking that there are probably people out there watching right now who also want to know that answer. And I was right there with you. Yeah.
So
I wonder about this other controversy, so many things to ask you about. Lady at the Ledge is a podcast that you were doing up until things have been just nuts. But I got a little peruse when I knew that you would be coming on to join me here on UnSpun podcast. I was like, wait a second. You've got a podcast of your own, and I've got to give you props for probably the best podcast episode titles ever. I have to do it, from dueling parenting advice to Swedish meatballs and a side of democracy.
Yeah, and the whole point is that there are a lot of serious people doing very serious podcasts about very serious topics. And that's good. That's where they are at. And I am obviously very serious about what I do. I take my job very seriously. I try to be a professional, but I think there's also a little bit of a room to have a conversation like you would with your friends. And so that's what my podcast is about. It's often somebody in my family who I'm speaking to on the phone that is a part of it, and just trying to ask questions again from people's points of view, right? And not having to ask like the political question to get to the bottom of something, but just saying, hey, well, what's all this about and how does that work? So just really trying to make politics accessible, because I think we think politics and we think, ooh, I don't like all that nastiness, but politics touches all of our lives in so many different ways that I think there is only benefit to having more people understand it, and hopefully being interested and becoming involved with politics.
And not being intimidated by it. That's a big piece of it. That's what I love about UnSpun is being able to have the banter with someone who is literally living it to the degree that you are. You make it accessible for someone like me. I'm not a political journalist. I'm a talk show host and have a history as a sports broadcaster. So I found when I first started to dip my toe in even politics and talk radio and writing for the Orca and doing this podcast, I was intimidated by it. And it is people like you who are fearless in your focus and clearly being the bureau chief for CTV-Vancouver at the legislature is a huge role. Did you always aspire to do that job in particular? Was politics always your goal as a journalist?
No, I can tell you that it really wasn't. I started out doing a lot of reporting, as you do, on crime, and I found that really interesting. I loved, the justice system and how all of that works. But in my, personal life, we've always talked about politics at home. We've always, even now, like my dad calls me every couple of days and gives me his hot take on the election.
I love that.
I think so-and-so is going to get. This is, I think, their problem. I'm like, okay, thanks, Dad. I'll keep that in mind. But, it's just something that we talk about and we're interested in. And when the opportunity presented itself, I was like, oh, I'm not one of those people. Like, I'm not I'm not a Vaughn Palmer. I'm not a Keith Baldry. What am I going to do there? And then the more and more I thought about it, I was like, well, maybe they need a Bhinder Sajan there. Like, who knows? And so, and then once I got here and really being able to kind of make the position my own, I like to focus on issues around, women. I like to focus on issues around, racialized communities, and my bosses support that. They're like, okay, we like that. That's a good story. Let's do it. And so, yeah, it's been really good. But I have to tell you, showing up at the legislature, almost it'll be 6 years in January.
Wow.
And at that time, I swear every single reporter was at least 6 feet tall. And so I'm not 6 feet tall. I'm not close to. I think I lie and say I'm 5'5". I don't know how tall I am. We'll just go with that. But just even physically being in a scrum with all these people who are towering above you. These are people whose, articles I had read, who I'd heard on the radio, who I'd seen on TV, and being there, and it takes such a long time to learn the files, to get the words right when you're asking the questions. It really was intimidating. But it's been a really great experience as well.
You are carving a path, certainly, for so many. You should be incredibly proud of what you've achieved to this point, and so much more in store. One of the things, before we get into the politics of this pandemic election, I want to just touch on the fact that one of the reasons why I love working with the Orca is so much of the conversation, so much of the political narrative has surrounded politics that have nothing really to do with us, if you know what I'm saying. And people can tell you all about Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell, but then they can't name off anybody at the legislature. And you're really educating people on where our tax dollars are being spent, where our initiatives and who we are is invested. Important.
Yeah, and it is. And it's funny because a lot of times people think of politics just as the campaigns, right? And the nastiness. And to really understand what goes on at the legislature, how different committees work together, how input is gathered for budget consultations, how lobbying works to try and get different, pieces in front of the government and get them to act on that is really interesting. I mean, something that, a couple of years ago, I started talking to the government about universal prescription contraception. Because when I lived in Alberta, people were like, oh yeah, that's free here. I don't know that it was, but I kind of thought about why don't we do that? And of course, Access BC, a number of groups were lobbying the government at the same time. And now, if the NDP is elected, it sounds like if the Liberals are elected, if, the Greens are elected, that we would be moving towards that. And it may seem like such a small thing, but when you actually think about the impact on especially, women's lives, how much money this costs when you're in university and you're trying to pay for this amongst all the other costs that you're facing. I mean, I think this is a good move, and it may seem like something little, but this is how we move things forward, in our society to make things better for people.
And it's so important to lend voice to that. And that's what you're doing. Because it might and a couple of women, we can talk about this. Maybe the guys in the room aren't thinking about that because it's really not hitting their wallet the way it is hitting the wallets of the women. So having that, you know what, guys, this is important. And then they go, oh, never thought of it. It is important. This should happen. Who's doing it? What's happening? And that's how you begin to move things forward. And being engaged in politics, if I'm hearing you correctly, and I think that I am, being engaged as a citizen in those plans, those wants, or even sparking an idea can really change things moving forward. It might take time. Yes, political machines sometimes move slowly, but they move if you put the effort in.
Yeah, and it's funny how, what I'm learning about how policies actually develop is people think, in one of my podcast episodes, we delved into this. It's, people were talking about, well, what should we do, for women who are victims of violence in their own homes, and breaking leases, and how only certain types of violence of women who are, or people who are suffering that were able to break their leases and not other types of violence. And that sometimes you just have to connect the dots for the people. And then they're like, oh yeah, hey, that doesn't make sense. And no, it's not overnight. Somebody once told me that changing policy in government was like, turning around a cruise ship. Not a 3-point turn. It takes a little while.
Yeah.
Eventually you get there. I mean, this is the system we've got. So.
And it's not as broken as the naysayers would have us possibly believe, to sort of be frozen in time and feel helpless in what we're doing. So it's important to engage, and this is really for our listener, for our viewer, is to make sure you're engaging at some level. Like you need not go an inch wide and a mile deep, as we like to say, as you and I are in the day-to-day happenings politically, but certainly make sure you're skimming that stone across the top of the water, away from YouTube and Netflix, and getting local and understanding what's happening in your backyard. So now take us through for the next little bit, if you will. From your perspective, what has been happening that has brought us to the upcoming election here in British Columbia? Were you surprised at first that it was called?
Kind of. So, I mean, these were rumors that we were hearing about kind of back in the summer. And at that time, we were like, no, we're in a pandemic. That's all we're talking about. There's no way this is happening. I don't know who's spreading this rumor. And then just like as the rumors kept persisting and you kept hearing different things,
yeah,
you're like, could this really happen? And even though it kind of all signs pointed to that Monday that we knew that this election call would come, it just happened in such a strange way, right? And so you have, normally you would have this event at Government House.
Yeah,
Government House is undergoing renovations because of course it is. It's 2020, so you don't have that photo op. And so there's an event in Langford, and so I've got the puppy in a bag, and I'm running out to Langford. And
puppy in a bag. You got the puppy.
Totally forgot to put on like real shoes, so I'm in socks and Birkenstocks, but it's okay because it's Victoria. You're allowed to do that here, and just then we knew like that we were in. But it was certainly a surprise, and I think that John-Horgan faced a lot of questions about why this time, and he has presented answers about he wants to put politics behind us. I'm not sure that resonates with a lot of people. I actually find that I'm speaking to people who say, just admit that you're after a majority. I think I would have respected you more.
Yeah.
Say all these other things like the deal with the Greens isn't working, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, that's a piece, I'm glad you said that, because we're allowed to have this conversation on a podcast like this. It is important to acknowledge that I think that the electorate, that the taxpayer, the human beings that are experiencing all of this really do appreciate transparency and clarity like never before. There is that feeling of some of this theater that is taking place is outdated. Like, can you just not complicate things by saying, I want to put politics behind us? Because calling an election is not putting politics behind us. Like, let's just at least agree on that, right?
Right. And I mean, I remember when a teacher that I had that said, just remember that people are smarter than often people think they are. And I think that all the time. I think people, people often say, like, why are you asking people on the street what they think? Well, people actually are very insightful when you go and chat with people. It's the same as, if you have a radio call-in show, you get different perspectives. And so, yeah, I think we have to respect people's intelligence here. And so some of those reasons that were presented for calling this election didn't sit well with many people.
Agreed. How do you feel that each of the party leaders have been perceived? I mean, watching the debate last week was really something. I mean, Shachi Kurl was our guest last week on UnSpun podcast. It was really quite something to watch. A magnificent moderation of that event. But in looking at each of the leaders, from your perspective, from your POV, what did you see happening there?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if everyone remembers back to the 2017 debate between, John-Horgan and Christy Clark. There were a number of moments. I would say some of them were contrived moments with the calm down, John, the touching of the arm.
Touching of the arm. Oh, yeah, don't touch me.
Yeah. and all of that. And so, I think John Horgan knew that he just had to go in and be, steady and strong and present his case, and that would be basically a win. Andrew Wilkinson kind of needs to, I think what he needed to do was present himself more to the everyday person. And he talked about how he was a doctor a lot. And it reminded me of like how Indian aunties are always like, oh, and he's a doctor. And so his son is a doctor. And I don't know if people really like that. And so it was more about kind of, I think he needed to present himself and show who he was as a person. I think he fell short on that. And Sonia Furstenau could basically do almost anything, I think, and it would have been okay. But she came out with some pretty strong lines in terms of calling out to John Horgan for this election. So I think, they all kind of in some ways needed to do what they did what they needed to do, because even, despite the things they needed to do, they were all able to talk about their policies because of that excellent moderation. Shachi Carl was like, this is the deal. This is how you're going to, behave. And I think that was really good in that way, that they were able to tell British Columbians what their parties are about.
It felt so dignified after watching that first Trump-Biden. I know it's completely different, the politics of the United States here, but after that shit show in the US, just saying the word debate kind of made us all be like, oh, okay. So, it had some real moments. I mean, yes, there was the drinking game around saying I'm a doctor. And then there was, certainly the Green Party leader, Sonia Furstenau, was her pregnant pause was epic. And then there was the gaffe by John Horgan when, some of my best friends are Black.
Oh my gosh, that was, and so, I kind of feel like I just went like blank as soon as he said, but I don't see color. And I was like, what? And I just kind of couldn't concentrate after that.
Yeah,
and I was like,
same.
Just say this. And it's such an important question at this time to acknowledge privilege and talk about, your reckoning with it. That was the question. And then to say all these things. And, I was up and they called on me first. They said, you only get one question. And I'm like, okay, how do I ask this in a way that isn't just like, what?
Yeah.
And, but yeah, and I'm glad I did. That was the moment for me that I wanted to know about, that how can you say that? And what does that actually mean? And he was pretty quick to say that was wrong. And, so I'm glad he clarified, but I also think like Andrew Wilkinson's answer didn't really address it either. Like all of them or both of them trying to be like, oh, well, I know lots of people of different, backgrounds. So big, happy family. I think we're beyond that in terms of our discussion around race. And so that was a bit disappointing to me. I don't think it was a colossal failure on anyone's part. It was just telling about, where we actually are as a society. I know I've heard John Horgan, when he's been asked about different racist incidents going, oh, I'm just shocked that this would happen, especially in Victoria. And I'm like, really? That is so different than my experience of being here in Victoria. I'm not shocked by it. So, I think it was just a very telling moment.
It shows how far we have to go. And I'm going to check my privilege. I am a white woman. And I have never looked at my 12-year-old son and said, if faced with law enforcement, put your hands out. I tell him to run toward the person with the uniform. So hearing the stories of mothers who have complete and utter different experiences than mine mean that I need to learn. It's not, I need to take mine and tell you to stop worrying about it, which is kind of that, there's that narrative that still floats through our society. It's that everything is overblown. It's like, I will say that you are white, you know, and that. Yeah.
And I think for me too, like there's, a safety aspect that comes with racism, but there's also an economic impact as well. No doubt. So a lot of times we talk about, oh no, we're good, we have a diverse workforce or whatever, but who's actually making the decisions and who's making the cash? Like, that's also what's really important. So
100%. And who gets the opportunity to get into the school? Who
Totally.
has the education to get into the good post-secondary school that gets you in a position to maybe have an opportunity to work your way up the ladder to become the CEO? It starts here.
Yes.
And goes here.
Yes. I mean, I know for me, I've had different opportunities than my brothers. Both my brothers wear turbans, and they have been told different things recently they've been told different things in job interviews about, maybe they wouldn't be appropriate for either clientele or others because they weren't sure how religious they are, like the same things we heard about Jagmeet Singh when he was elected leader. So we have a long way to go.
Oh, that is sad to hear that is happening in recent days. I mean, come on, Canada. We're better than this. I mean, we can take it all the way to the politics of clean drinking water for some First Nations peoples. Like, how is it that there is still not, there's a long way to go, but it's people like us having this type of conversation and people like you covering at the Ledge that is going to push that forward, even though it feels like a massive boulder going up the side of a mountain. It is, it's something to stay on and keep having the conversations with our younger people, like sitting at the table with my son and having the Black Lives Matter conversation and watching the protests and understanding why it's happening. And, all the way back to Colin Kaepernick taking a knee. There's a lot to unpack and to turn away from it because of, for any reason really is unacceptable at this moment.
I totally agree. And it's just shocking that they weren't prepared for those questions.
Yeah. So where do you see this going on election day? I mean, somebody might be watching this after the fact, but with so many mail-in ballots, it might be weeks before we know. But do you think it is going to be, did the internal polling for the NDP set them up here for what will be a big orange wave, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so what we're hearing from the NDP camp is that they believe that a lot of their supporters are going to mail in their votes. And so we're waiting kind of to see what the final numbers are from Elections BC. But I think typically, like if those ballots are missing from certain ridings, it's kind of math. I don't know all the math. Thank goodness I'm not on the election desk.
Same.
But, there's different ways I think the statistics can break down. And they have a way of, I think, even if you are leading in a certain number of ridings, that there might be kind of like a way to say that this is looking like it's going to be X, Y, or Z. Will people be ready to declare, different networks on election night? I don't know. It really depends on what happens. But if, already about 1 million people have voted, if you get that many more and there's a big lead for one party or another, then maybe we know the outcome on Saturday, but I really don't know what to expect. So it'll be interesting.
It is, unprecedented times, call for unprecedented politics. Where will Bhinder be watching?
I will be at NDP headquarters in an empty room. So that will be interesting to report on. Typically, you're there, people are filtering in, they're having drinks,
usually you're going, I can't really hear you right now, but I think.
Yeah, like the reporter moment where you're just like, hold on a second, everyone's just cheered because they just announced this riding, and we're not going to see those types of moments. But there are still storylines to be told and different things to pick apart as we see the results coming in. Oh my gosh, I'm smiling because I'm totally geeking out over this.
I love it. Yeah. It's going to be a blast to watch. I will be tuning in and I will be giving you I'm watching you right now. I'm in that room with you. Because it's so odd and different and awkward and crazy that this is all even happening.
Yeah. And then the other thing I think about too is so somebody has to declare something, because at the end of the night doesn't end until all the party leaders speak. And if they don't, like, would we just,
are we done?
yeah, like, are we just done? Are they just going to be like, hey, it's 9 o'clock. Let's just talk now. We probably won't know. I don't know how all of that will work out. I don't know how the camps will decide exactly, when they're ready for their leaders to come out and address the public. So we'll see.
What an adventure. And live TV in an empty room, not knowing how it's going to go, is some evil Knievel stuff for those of a certain era. They'll understand that. That's some daredevil stuff, Bhinder. Thank you for walking us through that. I have anxiety just thinking about what you're going to be doing on Saturday night, but super glad to have you representing and being a part of that legislative crew. Being a CTV Legislative Bureau Chief for CTV Vancouver is a huge role. And for all of your sisters, go get them.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you for all the work that you do. I know you said earlier that you don't think that you know a lot about politics. I would beg to differ. I think you've got a great knowledge, and I'm just really excited and happy that you invited me to be part of your podcast.
That is so nice of you. I don't know what to say now. Great. Aw. Thank you. Let's do that. How about we do this again? How about maybe a post-election wrap at some point?
That's right. I'm going to see if I can get Halloween costumes, and so I can, for my puppy, to describe how the election night went.
Okay, I like that. And when we reconvene here, I'll make sure I have my 2 dogs running around over here.
This will be it. Maybe this is what should happen on election night at NDP headquarters. Just let the puppies have the floor.
Puppies and a little Chardonnay, and we're good to go. Bhinder, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll talk again soon.